Breaking news to bring you. Counterterrorism police are now leading the investigation into the death of Ann Widdecombe after, quote, new evidence and information has come to light. This is according to Counterterrorism Policing South East. This is the breaking news that counter-terrorism police are now leading the investigation into the death of Ann Widdecombe after, I quote, new information and evidence has come to light. Let's just remind you as to how we got to this point. Well, around 8 a.m. on Wednesday morning, Widdecombe had appeared for a live interview on Talk TV. That afternoon, she was in touch with a researcher at Channel 5 News on WhatsApp, and they confirmed a TV appearance for later in the day. At 12:19 p.m. on Wednesday, she sent her last WhatsApp message. It read, "Received, panic over." Police believe the alleged murder took place at around 12:30 p.m. on Wednesday. At 1:25, Widdecombe failed to join a Zoom meeting for her interview, and multiple calls to check in go unanswered from the producer. On Thursday at around 11, emergency services find Widdecombe dead at home. The following morning, her agent confirms her death but doesn't mention the circumstances. Police arrested a 26-year-old man on Friday afternoon who was then released on Saturday morning and removed from the investigation. At Saturday at around 11:30, police confirmed they'd arrested a 28-year-old man in Rotherham, a white British national, and yesterday they said that there was no evidence the murder was politically motivated. Well, we're just hearing now that there's reaction from the Home Secretary, Shabana Mahmood. We'll bring you that statement in full, but this is the news that police say that new information and evidence has come to light and that the investigation is now being led by counter-terrorism police. This is Counter-Terrorism Policing South East. Let's bring you the statement from the Home Secretary. And this is Shabana Mahmood saying, this morning, I've spoken to the head of terrorism police. Following new information and evidence, they're now leading on the investigation into the horrific murder of Ann Widdecombe. The police are pursuing multiple lines of inquiry to establish the motivation for this attack. I will be updating the House further this afternoon. My thoughts today remain with Ann's family and friends and all those who loved her. So this is the breaking reaction and statement from the Home Secretary, Shabana Mahmood. Let's read it to you again. This morning, I have spoken to the head of terrorism policing. Following new information and evidence, they are now leading on the investigation into the horrific murder of Ann Widdecombe. The police are pursuing multiple lines of inquiry to establish the motivation for this attack. I'll be updating the House further this afternoon. My thoughts remain with Ann's family and friends and all those who loved her. And so this is the breaking news in the last few moments that Counter-Terrorism Policing South East is now leading the investigation into the death of Ann Widdecombe. I'm just getting reaction and further details here. It's just coming to us live at Sky News that the 28-year-old man, this is being brought to us by the Press Association, the 28-year-old white British man in custody has been, we understand, rearrested on suspicion of commission of preparation or instigation of acts of terrorism. This is according to Counter-Terrorism Policing South East. It comes, they say, after the new information and evidence came to light during the investigation into the 78-year-old Reform spokeswoman's death on Wednesday. This statement from Counter-Terrorism Policing saying that they can confirm they are now leading the investigation into the death of Ann Widdecombe. Specialist officers from across the CPT network have been working alongside colleagues in Devon and Cornwall Police since the investigation was launched last week. Officers were called by the ambulance service. Ann Widdecombe was located deceased at the property. The 28-year-old man was arrested on suspicion of murder on Saturday. The new information means that counter-terrorism police are leading the investigation. The man in custody has since been rearrested on suspicion of commission, preparation or instigation of acts of terrorism. We'll continue to work closely with colleagues from Devon and Cornwall Police to establish the full circumstances of the incident. Let's go live to Exeter and our correspondent Dan Whitehead. Dan, what can you tell us?
Well, this is a major update in this investigation, and we had been questioning what has been going on over the last 24 hours because of course, this arrest of this 28-year-old man took place at 9 p.m. on Saturday night. Fast forward to 9 o'clock this morning, and we're at 36 hours since his arrest, and we're looking at police from Devon and Cornwall having to go to magistrates for extra time, and so everyone was waiting for a charge. So we had suspected that perhaps behind the scenes in this investigation, something has been going on. And as we've just been hearing there, this significant statement from Counterterrorism Police confirming now that this man has been arrested now, rearrested on suspicion of the commission, preparation and instigation of acts of terrorism. Now, in the press conferences that we've had over the weekend, on Friday night and on Sunday, the police had repeated their belief that this was not terror-related, that they were keeping an open mind as to the motive behind this, and that there was no evidence to suggest that this was politically motivated. Let me just bring you a little bit of that statement, which we've touched on so far, saying that specialist officers from across the Counterterrorism Police network have been working alongside Devon and Cornwall Police since the murder investigation last week. The new information and evidence has come to light during what has been a dynamic and complex investigation. And as a result, Counterterrorism Policing South East is now leading the investigation. Now, this is interesting because Counterterrorism Police North East have been working with South Yorkshire Police on the arrest in Rotherham on Saturday night. Now we're looking at the South East CTP unit being involved, in fact, leading that investigation now. The man who we know has been in custody since Saturday night being rearrested on suspicion of commission, preparation and instigation of acts of terrorism. Now, the counter-terror statement says that they will continue to work with Devon and Cornwall Police, a major crime investigation team, and the CTP network across the country in an effort to continue this investigation. There's a bit more, let me just bring these lines because these are coming in thick and fast. We're hearing from Lawrence Taylor, who is the head of National Counter-Terrorism Police, saying, building on the progress made by Devon and Cornwall Police, we now have new information and new evidence that means CTP is now leading this investigation. We're pursuing multiple lines of inquiry to establish the motivation for this attack. Our priority is progressing this investigation quickly with all the capabilities that we have, and goes on to thank the public, of course, for their help in this investigation. Around 120 reports via the public portal online to Devon and Cornwall Police over the last few days as to gathering evidence which has been going on. We heard from the Chief Constable of Devon and Cornwall Police yesterday saying that this investigation has been happening at lightning pace, and it really has. Clearly behind the scenes there has been a lot going on, an investigation that was centred on this remote area of Dartmoor from Friday now spreads 270 miles north with an arrest in Rotherham on Saturday. What was the motive? What drove that suspect, if indeed he did so, to drive down to Ann Widdecombe's house? Now we learn involving counter-terrorism police in the south east of the country, and indeed that CTP unit leading the investigation, still working with Devon and Cornwall Police. But clearly this means that there is a change now in the direction of the motive, potentially, and clearly terrorism being treated as an act of terrorism, something that the police initially were so keen to stress that it wasn't. That was in the statement on Friday. It was repeated in the statement on Sunday. And clearly since 11 o'clock here in Exeter at Police HQ, there's been developments as they've been questioning that 28-year-old British white man from Rotherham. Clearly evidence and those interviews, the evidence they've gathered from the house there, police have been outside the house in Rotherham, evidence from his police interviews has brought in terrorism police now. And that clearly is the number one line of inquiry, that this is now being treated as a terrorism incident.
Dan Whitehead, stick with us live in Exeter for us. I just want to take a couple of moments just to remind viewers of some of the initial reaction to this as well. We've been hearing a post on X from the Home Secretary Shabana Mahmood in relation to these statements from counter-terrorism policing. This goes on to say, this morning I've spoken to the head of terrorism police. Following new information and evidence, Shabana Mahmood says they are now leading on the investigation into the horrific murder of Ann Widdecombe. The police are pursuing multiple lines of inquiry to establish the motivation for the attack. I'll be updating the House further this afternoon. My thoughts today remain with Ann's family and friends and all those who loved her. Just looking at the timings for the House of Commons, I would expect that somewhere late afternoon. I would think somewhere in the region of later afternoon, just in other business to get through first, other Commons business to get through. So expect that statement from the Home Secretary in a few hours' time. I'm sure we'll be able to bring you the exact timing of that a little later as we get more information. But let's also just bring you the further details from Lawrence Taylor. This is the head of the National Counterterrorism Policing body, saying, as Dan was pointing out there, building on the progress made by colleagues in Devon and Cornwall Police, new information that means counterterrorism policing is now leading the investigation, pursuing multiple lines of inquiry. The investigation is progressing quickly with all the capabilities they have. If anyone has any information, please share it with the police. And going on to thank the local communities, the wider public and the media for support and patience, and asking them to continue to support them in the next stages of the investigation. And Dan, you were saying, as we see these aerial images of Ann Widdecombe's property down in Haytor, down in Devon, that as the investigation on the scene had expanded and become more detailed, that cordon, that area that was under investigation had widened, that the media was pushed further back from that location, and you could really see kind of the physical fine finger work that was being undertaken to search for any evidence, any clues, any details.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when we arrived on Friday evening to Ann Widdecombe's house, the cordon was simply at her front gate. It was very localised simply to her house. It was on Saturday lunchtime, at the same time as the Reform UK leader Nigel Farage attended to leave some flowers. Of course, Ann Widdecombe, a spokesperson for Reform UK, that the cordon was extended. And before we were sort of pushed backwards, we filmed police officers on the roads, which, were probably half a kilometre behind Ann Widdecombe's house. It was a rural area, but beating through bushes with sticks by the side of the road. We saw officers scouring small areas of moorland. It has not been an extensive search, obviously, of the moorland area, but in the localised area, I would say within a kilometre, there has been work outside of the property by Devon and Cornwall Police, although we understand mutual aid has been used. And I don't know whether it's evidence from there or perhaps more likely evidence from the interviews that will have been going on now for in excess of 36 hours with the 28-year-old suspect that have led to this significant update of counter-terrorism police now leading on this investigation. So the involvement has gone from when we arrived on Friday with Devon and Cornwall Police to Counterterrorism Policing North East, to South Yorkshire Police, to Counterterrorism Policing South East, now leading the investigation, and that statement from the Home Secretary and a statement in the Commons. So clearly this is ramped up a level in terms of the motive and the significance, the wider significance of the reasoning behind this attack on Ann Widdecombe on Wednesday. And let's just remind us there that we're obviously on sort of day 5 since this first happened. The 78-year-old former Conservative minister, they believe, was attacked at around 12:30 in the afternoon on Wednesday. But she wasn't found until it was nearly 24 hours later, 11:40 on Thursday, when she was first found. And that is really, of course, when the police were alerted. But it wasn't until Friday afternoon that we in the public were made aware that this was now being treated as a murder inquiry. So a significant period of time between the attack happening and her body being found, 24 hours for any suspect to flee the area. And of course, the working thesis for the police now, the terrorism police, is that this suspect was up in Rotherham after the attack. We don't know whether his travel movements are around that, but CCTV footage, which we've been showing, shows the moment that police from South Yorkshire, with assistance from the counter-terrorism police in the North East, arrived at that property in Rotherham at the scene. That was on 9 p.m. on Saturday night, and took in this 28-year-old man. That is, of course, when the clock starts ticking for police, 24 hours initially to question them. Police can then further approve another 12 hours. That brings us to 9 o'clock this morning, and that can, of course, be extended, and especially when it's dealt as a terrorism incident, that can be extended much further. And this now makes sense into why we have been perhaps waiting so long. We've been speaking to police multiple times this morning, and questions amongst journalists, of course, about, why has there been no charge yet? Clearly, behind the scenes, there has been a significant ramping up, an investigation underway, now being led, interestingly, by Counterterrorism Police South East, and those details will emerge. Whether or not we were hearing word that there would be a press conference this afternoon here at Devon and Cornwall Police, that may now. I don't know whether that will be up in the air because it is being led by CTP in the southeast. We'll have to see. But clearly, still a lot of questions to answer, and of course, no charge yet in this case. So we'll be keeping an eye out for that, because this 28-year-old man has not been charged formally yet. So that's something to watch out for. But clearly significant. And just to bring you, some of the key lines from that CTP statement, I think it's important to sort of stress that they say that this has been a dynamic and complex investigation, and I think that's clear to see. Lightning pace, the police say here, and the complexity of that, they say, as a result, means that CTP, Counterterrorism Police South East, now leading that investigation, but they will be continuing to work closely with their colleagues from Devon and Cornwall Police's Major Crime Investigation Team here, and the wider across the Counterterrorism Policing network, because it has involved CTP in the Northeast, who assisted with that arrest. So look, a complex investigation, clearly, but one that has ramped up in the last few hours in terms of the level of force that is now investigating it, and a change in what we have been told by Devon and Cornwall Police on Friday and Sunday, that this was not believed to be terror-related. That has changed, and clearly it is now being thought that it was an incident of terrorism.
Just taking you through the developing news here with our correspondent Dan Whitehead, who's in Exeter, of the news that counter-terrorism policing officers are now leading the investigation into the death and the alleged murder of Ann Widdecombe, a former Conservative minister during the tenure of John Major, during his time in office, then a Reform spokesperson for the Reform Party, just looking actually to see if there's any initial reaction from colleagues across the political spectrum. Nothing as yet from Sir Keir Starmer or Kemi Badenoch regarding this development that counter-terrorism policing officers are leading on this. Nothing either from Nigel Farage in the initial outcome. But I am just seeing a brief reaction from the Deputy Leader of Reform, Richard Tice, calling for an apology from some quarters to Nigel Farage and Reform members following the news that this case has now developed into one being led by anti-terrorism policing. Reform had raised concerns about the level of support that some of their members were getting. Obviously, this is a developing situation, but a bit of reaction, an initial reaction there from Richard Tice, the Deputy Leader of Reform, obviously a former colleague of Ann Widdecombe, who was a spokesperson for the party. We can also bring you a little bit of more details of what the Home Secretary, Shabana Mahmood, had posted on social media in the last 20 minutes or so, saying that she had spoken this morning to the head of terrorism police, saying that following the new information and evidence, they are now leading on the investigation into the horrific murder of Ann Widdecombe. Police pursuing multiple lines of inquiry to establish the motivation for the attack, updating the House further this afternoon. Thoughts today remaining with Ann's family and friends and all those who loved her. And as we were hearing as well from Dan Whitehead, the news that the 28-year-old who had been arrested has been re-arrested on suspicion of terrorist acts. Let me just bring you the exact turn of phrase that was used by counterterrorism policing, saying that he has been arrested on suspicion of commission, preparation or instigation of acts of terrorism. As yet, no charges made, but the suspicion there of commission, preparation or instigation of acts of terrorism. It's worth noting that this investigation is bringing together multiple police forces, Devon and Cornwall major crime investigation teams, counter-terrorism policing more broadly, and also officers up in Yorkshire who had assisted with that initial arrest on suspicion of murder in Rotherham. Well, that individual has been rearrested on suspicion of commission, preparation or instigation of acts of terrorism. This is a developing situation. There's plenty more on the Sky News website and the Sky News app, the live page running there as we speak. Let's take you back live to Dan Whitehead, who's in Exeter. And Dan, just talk to us about how this case has rocked the local community, because moving to Devon was a key moment for Ann Widdecombe in kind of her kind of semi-retirement. I guess it's fair to say it's a very quiet community. It's a community where anything out of the ordinary would have been noted, and surely a case that has truly rocked and shocked neighbours.
Yeah, I mean, we hear that, don't we, in incidents like this, but you really do feel it in a community which probably had sort of around 12 houses outside of Ann Widdecombe's home. Her nearest village, a mile or so down the road, Ilsington. We were inside the local shop there, and the lady working there told us that she came every morning to pick up her paper. She was very pleasant, of course, described her, as many had, as a fiery woman, opinionated. I think she did sort of keep herself to herself in terms of, she was quite a private lady, but clearly publicly enjoyed the limelight politically and so forth. So, yes, rocked her community, and this sort of ramp up, this significant update in terms of the investigation will obviously be worrying for them. We've just had a statement from Devon and Cornwall Police, which actually is a similar statement from Counterterrorism Police. They do say actually further inquiries now to CTP of the South East. So clearly now Counterterrorism Police leading this investigation in terms of the wider inquiries. It's just a really significant update that 28-year-old man rearrested on suspicion of terrorism, and CTP now leading that investigation.
Dan, thank you very much indeed. And a reminder of that breaking news. It's 1 o'clock, and if you're just joining us, a reminder of the breaking news. Counter-Terrorism Police are now leading the investigation into the death of Ann Widdecombe after new information and evidence has come to light. The former Conservative MP was found dead with serious injuries in her home in the village of Haytor in Devon last Thursday morning. Now, in a statement on X, Home Secretary Shabana Mahmood said this morning, "I have spoken to the head of Counterterrorism Policing following new information and evidence. They are now leading the investigation into the horrific murder of Ann Widdecombe." The police are pursuing multiple lines of inquiry to establish the motivation for this attack. I will be updating the House further this afternoon. My thoughts today remain with Ann's family and friends and all those who loved her. Well, the head of National Counter-Terrorism Policing, Lawrence Taylor, has also released a statement. He said, building on the progress made by our colleagues in Devon and Cornwall Police, we now have new information and evidence that means counter-terrorism policing is now leading the investigation. We're pursuing multiple lines of inquiry to establish the motivation for this attack. Our priority is progressing this investigation quickly with all the capabilities we have available to us. If anyone has any information, please share it with the police. Let's go back to Dan Whitehead, who is in Exeter. I mean, Dan, you've been covering this story since Friday, I think it must have been. There have been so many twists and turns, and this latest twist is a very big one, isn't it?
It really is a significant one. I think, to be honest, all of us had been waiting for an update, whether that was a charge against this 28-year-old man or whether he would be released. Remember, of course, we had a 26-year-old man arrested and released quite swiftly locally here in Devon throughout this investigation. We had a sense that there was clearly something going on behind the scenes, just given the amount of time that it was taking, because police seemed relatively confident in the press conference yesterday, saying that they were not looking for any other suspects, anyone else in relation to this murder inquiry. Using phrases like that tends to suggest that they are confident in the evidence they may have against that suspect. So many of us were wondering why a charge wasn't coming. And of course, that hasn't come yet. Clearly behind the scenes, as you say, this has been a significant update. I mean, he was arrested, this 28-year-old man, on Saturday night, and we have footage, Sky News has footage of the moment that police arrived at that house in Rotherham. a minute or two, I think, after 9 p.m. on Saturday night, speeding to the edge of that house, officers getting out, one with a door battering ram to clearly see if they were not going to be able to get into that house. And that is where the 28-year-old was arrested and then taken into custody. At what point then he was rearrested? Because the statement from CTP say that the man in custody has been rearrested. Obviously, he was arrested on suspicion of murder, now rearrested on suspicion of the commission, preparation and instigation of acts of terrorism. So obviously the charges very significant, but also a real change in what the message has been over the last 3 days or so from Devon and Cornwall Police. They said to us on Friday night here at Police HQ in Exeter on Sunday yesterday morning that there is still nothing to suggest that this was terror-related. So the question is, what's happened since midday yesterday up until this point this morning? Well, of course, detectives, Devon and Cornwall Police detectives, who have had the primacy on leading with this investigation, will have been questioning that suspect. Now, they get 24 hours initially, which took them to 9 p.m. last night. They can get another 12 hours, which takes them to 9 a.m. this morning, and then they can ask for further extensions for serious crimes such as murder. And then under terror laws, the time that they can question can be a lot more than those initial 36 hours. So clearly now that counter-terrorism police are involved, that gives them more time to question this suspect. But see, the CTP, the counter-terrorism police, were involved from Saturday, the North East unit, because they assisted Devon and Cornwall Police alongside South Yorkshire Police in that arrest in Rotherham. So you've had a CTP unit in the North East, and now the investigation is being led by CTP in the South East. They say that they will continue to work with their colleagues from Devon and Cornwall Police's major crime unit, but we've heard from D&C now that the sort of inquiries and the focus shifts obviously to counter-terrorism police. An extremely worrying update for obviously the family and the friends of Ann Widdecombe and those who knew her, and the community near Haytor and Ilsington, her closest village on the edge of that national park, because if you look at the last 5 days, from when Ann Widdecombe was attacked, which we believe was 12:30 on Wednesday, 24 hours later her body was found. It went into the public domain on Friday morning, but of course initially, you'll remember on Friday morning across the board, we thought this was, she was 78, she wasn't too old. It was a sad death of a former prominent politician, but there was no suspicion of foul play. And it was 3 o'clock on Friday that we were getting wind that there was going to be a press conference here down in Exeter. And from that moment forward, really, it has, in the words of the Chief Constable, been an investigation that has moved at lightning pace, because we've seen arrests, we've seen people released without charge, and now we see the shift focusing, we saw the shift focusing up to the north of England, and now we see the shift becoming very much a terrorism focus. So a complete change in direction in this investigation. A man who had been arrested on suspicion of the murder of Ann Widdecombe, who it appears in this investigation had potentially travelled 270 miles to carry out that attack. That is the suspicion that he was arrested on. It now seems to have been rearrested for preparing acts of terrorism. So that changes the situation for the police investigation, potentially gives them more time. And it is important to stress that this man has not been charged yet. He is still under investigation. He is being re-arrested. That may well reset the clock. It gives police more time. And of course now, we knew there was mutual aid involved. We are now dealing with multiple counter-terrorism police units. We are now dealing with multiple police forces. A lot of detectives, a lot of resources being thrown at what is clearly now a far more complex investigation than was originally thought.
So Dan, now he's been rearrested, that means they have more time to question him. Given that there's a change in focus and counter-terrorism police are leading the investigation, will the investigation be completely different? Will they be looking for very different things? What are the next steps for the police?
Well, you can have many more hours to question a suspect when it goes into terrorism, and serious offences like murder can, go up to 96 hours. I think it all depends on what the evidence is that has been found. I think that this investigation, this rearrest, I think that they said in their statement this comes following here we are, new information and evidence has come to light. Now, is that things that have been found in the property in Rotherham, which we know and have filmed officers coming in and out of certainly throughout yesterday, or is this evidence that was presented to detectives as they questioned this 28-year-old man? We will, of course, have to wait as the law takes its course as to, where that evidence. But clearly, enough evidence has come from either or both of those sources for this to be removed from Devon and Cornwall Police's jurisdiction and put in the hands of Counterterrorism Police. And of course, you brought that statement there from the Home Secretary confirming that she has spoken to Counterterrorism Police, and we actually understand that Shabana Mahmood will give a statement in the Commons later this afternoon on that situation. We'd heard this morning that there would be a statement in the Commons on politicians' safety. I don't know whether that's changed now and gone away up to the Home Secretary. We'll have to see. But Shabana Mahmood taking to X, saying that she has spoken to Counterterrorism Police, and following the new information and evidence, they are now leading the investigation into the horrific murder of Ann Widdecombe. The police are pursuing multiple lines of inquiry to establish the motivation for this attack. And yes, I will be updating the House further this afternoon. And motivation has been a key word because there has been a lot of speculation online, of course, instantly and predictably about the motivation behind this. Anne was obviously not involved in frontline politics for many years, but she certainly was in the limelight when it came to politics in the latter years for Reform UK, before that the Brexit Party, and of course a long-term Conservative politician, and was well known not only for politics but for her participating in entertainment as well. So an extremely well-known politician whose political views were prominent. And there now, of course, needs to be a question again as to the motivation behind this. And that will no doubt form part of the detectives' investigation work as they continue to question this man who was arrested in Rotherham. The focus, of course, now shifting from just a murder inquiry to something that is terror-related.
Dan, thank you for now. Let's bring in our political correspondent, Rob Powell. And Rob, I mean, we heard a statement from Shabana Mahmood, the Home Secretary. Has there been any other reaction from the government, but also from wider Westminster?
No, not as yet, but you imagine that there will be probably quite a lot of reaction, especially maybe from the Reform Party, clearly the party that Ann Widdecombe was a member of, a spokesperson of, at the time of her death. I imagine as well that this announcement will mean that this has the potential to get more politically heated. I think at the moment there had been sort of some tension starting to be generated around it, most notably and obviously, I think, by Reform MPs talking about issues with security as they see it towards MPs, accusing the government and the House authorities of not doing enough to protect MPs and linking it back to the apparent murder of Ann Widdecombe. Of course, what was sort of standing in the way of those two things being clearly linked was the fact that Devon and Cornwall Police were saying, at the time anyway, that they weren't treating it as a terrorist incident and they had no information to suggest that it was a political killing in any way either. I think that all shifts with this announcement that Counter-Terror Police are taking the lead in this. And whilst clearly we still have to be really, really careful not to speculate too much on the background to this and clearly not to do anything that might jeopardise the investigation, I think you will see this being talked of maybe in more of the context that we speak about the murder of David Amos, who was killed by a terrorist inspired by the Islamic State, in the same way that we talk about Joe Cox, who was killed by a far-right terrorist as well. And I think that link then to the threats faced by MPs and their security around them, whether it is tight enough, whether it is tough enough, that argument becomes I think a lot more salient. I imagine as well you will hear this afternoon MPs questioning why it has taken this long, I guess, to get to a point where they are talking about this as a terrorist incident. I think the assumption had been that Devon and Cornwall Police had information that MPs, that the public, that the press weren't privy to, and that is why they were making it quite clear that they weren't treating it as a terrorist incident, and that they weren't seeing this as a political killing either. I think privately and publicly, when it was some reform figures anyway, many were scratching their heads, wondering what the explanation could be. I think the fact that it is now being led on by counter-terror police may lead some to question I guess, the nature of the investigation in its early stages, because I think many had wondered whether this would be the eventual place that this investigation ended up anyway. But yes, I think it will get more politically heated now, and I think there will inevitably be, when Shabana Mahmood comes to the Commons to update MPs on this afternoon, a lot of quite pointed questions about what this means for MPs' security and whether those security measures are tough and robust enough at the moment.
Let's get more on our top story. Counter-terrorism police are now leading the investigation into the death of Ann Widdecombe after new information and evidence has come to light. I'm now joined by police commentator Martin Gallagher. Martin, just want to get your reaction to this switch, because we were told that terrorism wasn't involved and now counter-terrorism police are leading things. Is that a normal thing to happen?
Good afternoon. I'm not surprised. I think there was three obvious potentials where this was going. The police didn't have evidence of a political motive at the outset. So the three potentials were that it was random, which was obviously bizarre for someone to have driven their car that length of time and carried out an act such as this. It was personal, that it was someone that Ms Widdecombe had encountered in her personal life, or it was political. They were the three obvious ones. And my summation would be, I would surmise from this that the police have now established evidence of some form of motive, which has now brought about the involvement of the counter-terrorism police. The motive will have been found, obviously, during the searches and such that the police are conducting, or through interviews with the suspect, so it might not have been immediately apparent. So I would refrain from any criticism of the police. The police can only act on what they know. And when they find things out, things change. That's the nature of police.
But do you get a sense that the police were quite quick to put information out? We've kind of felt like the 26-year-old was arrested and they were not looking for anybody else, and then suddenly that changed. Then it was a 28-year-old, which we now have, this man is in custody. But also we were told throughout that terrorism wasn't a consideration, and that felt like a very emphatic statement, and now that's completely changed. Are they under pressure to put information out in this sort of new social media world?
No, I think we're missing part of what they were saying. It was at that time, so there was no political motive at that time. And I think, we focus on the no political motive and are neglecting the remainder of that sentence, at that time. So I think other commentators, and certainly I, would imagine that the police are approaching this with an open mind, and they've acted rightly when they've obviously uncovered evidence of some form of motive that's lent itself, I would guess, because the counter-terrorism police involved, towards political violence, which is what has happened here. So I think the police have been providing information. It's a very high-profile incident. The police will appreciate they have to provide information, and they have done so, but unfortunately, as typically occurs, only part of what the police was saying was being focused on, not the whole part of what they were saying.
How will the investigation change now counter-terrorism police are leading it? Will it be any different?
So a significant increase in resource, which will have occurred. That's not to say a murder is under-resourced in the UK. Let's be clear on that. But the motivation bringing in terrorism here brings in a lot more specialist resource. It's a change in the command structure as to who's dealing with the incident, and you've got a whole new prism of information that's going to need to be provided to the public ultimately, because of the concern round about the fact that we're now talking about a counter-terrorism investigation into the death of a very prominent politician. That will be playing into this. So we were already at the very high end of public interest. I think we've got beyond this. And this will be one of the, this will be an international story now if it wasn't already.
Martin Gallagher, thank you very much indeed for bringing us up to date with that.